Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with salted caramel custard. That's right, say hello to your new favorite dessert. And of course, I'm basing that statement on the assumption that you like beautiful, easy to make, and extraordinarily delicious desserts. But if that is the case, I feel pretty confident about my prediction. And by the way, if you're a fan of the creme caramel, this is like having an entire ramekin full of the best parts of that dessert. So I'm very much looking forward to showing you how to put this together. And we're going to start off by separating some eggs. Because for this, we're going to need 9 large egg yolks. And when I'm doing this many, my favorite method is to simply crack the egg into my hand and letting the white drip between my fingers into a bowl below. And of course, you could use the standard shell-to-shell method. But like I said, when I'm doing a bunch of them, I do prefer this method. Plus, if someone's watching, it looks super cool and almost as if you know what you're doing. But anyway, one way or another, we're going to separate 9 large egg yolks. And of course, we're going to save those whites for another recipe, quite possibly involving a meringue. And then once our eggs are set, we can head over to the stove to start our caramel. So we're going to put some white granulated sugar in a heavy bottom saucepan and place that over medium heat and cook it until we have a nice dark amber caramel. And the method we're using here is called a dry caramel. So we're not going to add any water, and we're definitely not going to stir it. We're simply going to leave it on the heat, observing carefully, and eventually you'll see the sugar starting to melt around the edges and start to turn color. And it is going to be tempting to stir it, but don't. Just let it go until it starts to darken and bubble around the outside like this. And at that point, we'll start to shake and swirl the pan until all that sugar is dissolved. Or is it melted? I think it's melted. But anyway, the point is not to stir it. Just keep moving it like this until eventually we have a beautiful, clear, dark amber caramel. And by the way, I told you to use medium heat, but I'll be honest, I use about medium high. And that's because I made like 1,000 of these, and the medium high will accomplish this a little faster. So if you do want to try this with a little higher heat, go ahead. Sugar's pretty cheap, so if you do go too far and burn it, you can always start over. But anyway, like I said, we're not going to stir. We're just going to keep swirling the pan like that. And eventually all that sugar's going to melt, and your mixture should look like this. And then as soon as this has been accomplished, we're going to very quickly and very carefully whisk in 2 cups of cream. And be careful, it's going to bubble up, but you should be fine. Just keep pouring and stirring. And what's going to happen is you're going to think you wrecked this, because that caramel we just made is going to seize up and basically turn into strands of hard rock candy. But fear not, just keep stirring. And as that cream heats up, all that stuff's going to melt off your whisk and dissolve into the cream. And not to pat myself on the back, but one of the major advantages of a video is that you're able to see everything's going to turn out all right. If people were following a written recipe only and saw something that looked like this, they would probably stop and throw it away and make something else. But as you can see, if you just keep stirring, that mixture is going to come back up to temperature, and that sugar is going to dissolve right into the cream. And one thing I wanted to mention, a lot of chefs throw a chunk of butter into this, but I don't. The cream here is like 35% butterfat, so I don't think it's necessary. Said the man who just posted a sausage recipe finished with a butter sauce. But regardless, and as soon as that sugar dissolves fully into the mixture, we're going to turn off the heat and add the final ingredients. So we will turn off the flame, and we'll toss in a half a teaspoon of kosher salt, which, by the way, is definitely not the same thing as a half a teaspoon of fine salt. That would be too salty. In fact, I really need to do that video explaining the different types of salt. But anyway, we're going to whisk in a touch of salt, as well as some pure vanilla extract. And then last but not least, 1 cup of cold milk. And while this mixture is still very hot, by adding that cup of cold milk, we've cooled that down enough so our egg yolks don't scramble when we add this in, which, by the way, is the next step. So we will go ahead and add this hot mixture to our egg yolks, but to play it safe, we'll start off slow. So we will add 1 ladle and whisk that in. And once that's been incorporated, we can add another. And then after a couple ladles full, we are safe to add the rest. And I should mention, a lot of recipes say to strain this, in case there's any little particles of sugar or whatever. But you know what I like much less than tiny particles of sugar? Cleaning a strainer. So I don't strain, and don't think you need to either. And as soon as we have everything mixed together, we are ready to fill our ramekins. So I have 6 ramekins placed in a baking dish, and we'll go ahead and we'll divide our mixture evenly among them. And no, you do not need to butter those ramekins. In fact, don't butter those ramekins. Totally unnecessary. And then once those are evenly filled, we have to do one very important thing before this goes in the oven. We want to pour in enough water to go halfway up the ramekin. And I'm just using hot tap water, by the way. So I'm going to pour that in and make sure it's coming up, like I said, about halfway. And at that point, these are ready to bake. So let's go ahead and pop those in the center of a 300-degree oven for about 45 to 60 minutes, or until they look like this and the custard is just set. And what I mean by just set is this. If we give that ramekin a little wiggle, everything should jiggle as one mass. Okay, if the center's kind of jiggling at a different rate than the outsides, and it still seems a little loose, put it back in for a couple more minutes. But assuming your custards have been cooked perfectly, what we'll do is carefully remove those from the baking dish and let those cool completely on a rack. And what we want to do is cool these down to room temp before we wrap them up and chill them thoroughly. Do not, under any circumstances, eat 2 of them at room temperature because they're just not as good. So let them cool down to room temp, and then we'll wrap those in plastic and then chill those for at least an hour until ice cold. Okay, the colder the better. And then once those are fully chilled, we can go ahead and serve those up with the traditional sprinkling of large flaky sea salt, and our salted caramel custards are done. And just looking fantastic. I think the top of a cooked salted caramel custard is maybe my favorite color in the world. It's kind of like a combo between camel hair and pumpkin. And by the way, camel hair pumpkin, worst custard flavor ever. But anyway, just absolutely stunning to look at, and even more delicious to eat. So let me grab a spoon and dig in. And as far as the texture goes, we do want something soft, smooth, and custardy, but we do want it firm enough to hold those nice sharp lines when we dig in with the spoon. All right, there's a very old culinary saying that I just made up. When it comes to a baked custard, they shouldn't droop when you scoop. So I thought this was spot on. And then as far as the taste, you've heard me say a million times before, I'm not a big dessert person, and that's mostly because I don't like really sweet things. But this really isn't overly sweet. Okay, when you caramelize sugar, it does take some of the sweetness away. So to summarize, I love everything about this recipe. And I know a lot of home cooks get flustered by custard, but hopefully as you saw in this video, it's really not that hard. And the results are, well, you saw the results. Incredible. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.